Former Vice President Mike Pence has finally broken his silence about the January 6th Capitol insurrection. So now that's the same insurrection, of course, where people were shouting, "Hang Mike Pence." They weren't saying
Mike Pounds.
Well, they were saying Mike Pence, but of course, maybe if you asked them, if you ask them now, it's, "Oh, hang my pants." Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. Now, the reason they were, of course, mad at Mike Pence was because he refused to stop the certification of election results, which, by the way, he had no power to do so. All right. So, all right. Now, he broke his silence. Turns out he's still kind of on the Trump train, which is unfortunate. But here's what he said. Pence, according to The Hill, who was presiding over a joint session of Congress when it was certification of the Electoral College results, was interrupted by a mob of former President Trump supporters, said there were significant voting irregularities and numerous instances of officials setting aside state election law in the 2020 presidential election. So understand that Mike Pence is doubling down and still throwing his weight behind Donald Trump's assertions that the election was somehow stolen. Oh, great. Now, the former vice president said that the events, the invasion into the Capitol, of course, had deprived the American people of a substantive discussion in Congress about election integrity in America. If it weren't for those, pesky people trying to murder me, we could have had a real discussion about voter fraud in this country. So not only are you, again, throwing MAGA under the bus, but you're also giving yourself cover, saying, "I was on your side all along. Please don't murder me. Yeah, it'd be real helpful, please." Okay, so now the context for these statements weren't just about Donald Trump, but also were part of an attack on the House Democrats' bill H.R. 1. Now, that is a voting rights bill that the House passed earlier today. It expands voting, so that is naturally a pretty good thing. Now, that's unless you're a Republican, in which you think that more voting is bad. In fact, Pence said that this bill would increase opportunities for election fraud. Oh, how interesting. So now, what evidence does Mike Pence have to present to prove that? Right, to prove that expanding voting, mail-in voting, etc., would actually do that. Oh, right, doesn't. Now, what would happen is, of course, you would allow more people to vote. Simply that. Which, I guess is fraud to you. Because Republicans don't want people voting. They want less people voting, less American citizens voting. If they're not voting Republican, they might as well not even exist, right? And that's the real fraud here. That's the crime. You deprive American citizens their right to vote because they might be, they're black, or they're students that generally vote for Democrats, college students, or they're disabled, or they don't have a gun. Yes, seriously, there are places where, that have voter ID that will accept not a student ID, but an ID for a gun. So that's what's going on in this country. All right. So now, the former vice president also argued that in the op-ed that measures included in the voting rights bill would, quote, trample the First Amendment, further erode confidence in our elections, and forever dilute the votes of legally qualified eligible voters. Read, of course, Republicans, conservative voters. But hey, do you know what actually erodes confidence in elections? When you scream about non-existent voter fraud for years. That's kind of what happens. That people tend to not believe in the results of elections when you keep saying every election is stolen because look at all the massive voter fraud coming from across from over the border, all these undocumented immigrants, all these illegals coming in to vote when they, of course, don't have voting rights and they don't actually vote. And also, by the way, you don't have any evidence of that. Why would people who generally do less crime than native born Americans? It's true. Undocumented immigrants, their one thing is they don't want to get caught and deported, right? So that makes them less likely to be criminals doing criminal action. And so why would they go and risk getting caught by fraudulently voting. That doesn't make any sense. But of course, they never really think this thing through. It just doesn't. Okay, so now, again, no evidence of widespread voter fraud, okay? Numerous studies, investigations, committee members poring over numbers, looking at voting data with a fine-tooth comb. In fact, Michigan, we just completed another audit of our election results. And guess what? What we found is that the same result holds up. Biden won Michigan fair and square. And the only thing, by the way, that was ultimately found is that Republicans happen to be the biggest danger to American democracy and voting rights by literally trying to overthrow an election. Yeah. He continues. While legislators in many states have begun work on election reform to restore public confidence in state elections, i.e. by banning more people from voting, unfortunately, congressional Democrats have chosen to sweep those valid concerns and reforms aside and to push forward a brazen attempt to nationalize elections in blatant disregard of the U.S. Constitution. Now, that, of course, happens to be a very, well, it happens to be an interpretation that takes a lot of liberties with the truth. Let's just say that. All right. Now, the actual legislation passed by House Democrats does none of those things. It would expand essentially opportunities to vote by mail, which was very successful in this election, despite Louis DeJoy, the Postmaster General, trying to slow down the mail to the point where it would make a lot of ballots invalid. Yeah. And also would require that states establish electronic voter registration, which makes sense. We're living in a technological society. And at this point, it would make sense to have online voter registration and give the Justice Department more authority to enforce voting rights law. Now, of course, you would have to submit proof, evidence, of course, that you are who you say you are online. And there are absolutely ways to do that. What? How do I know? Well, okay. I had to send a picture of my license to Facebook in order to monetize my live streams or to monetize it all. So seriously, Facebook requires ID at this point. Elections do, at least for registration, they would have to have a proof that you are a citizen. And so generally they do. Generally they do. And so now, that said, it appears that good old Mike Pence is lying to you. Lying to you. Because he, like most Republican politicians, have an agenda. That agenda, of course, is to reduce the number of people voting so that Republicans can still end up winning elections. So, that's it. That's the goal. And it's been their openly stated goal for a very, very long time, for many decades. And of course, going back to the godfather of the modern conservative movement, a man named Paul Weyrich, who I tend to, feature on this channel quite a bit. Paul Weyrich, here's what he said. During a conservative meeting, he said this out loud and allowed himself to get filmed saying it. Here it is. You probably know which one it is.
They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
They said that out loud. It's amazing. So now keep that in mind when I tell you the next part. So now, during the Trump administration, Mike Pence also headed a voter integrity commission, right? So this was something that was supposed to root out voter fraud, right? First, it was supposed to find it, supposed to prove it, and then they can use that evidence that they found to go and do stuff like voter ID. Okay. Well, so what happened? Well, it turns out they found nothing. And actually, a lot of states considered what they were doing as overreach. How about them states' rights for you? I'm just saying. A former Democratic member of the commission also in 2018 said they never found evidence of widespread voter fraud and accused the commission of having, quote, a preordained outcome to support President Trump's claims of voter fraud. Those claims, of course, would not only sow the seed to the January 6th fail surrection, but also empower Republican governors and congressmen to attempt to restrict voting rights. And again, that's what it is. So now here comes the biggest irony. Now, as Mike Pence makes these statements that are very pro-Trump in nature, that are backing up Trump 100%, Donald Trump's going to throw him under the bus again. Anonymous sources, I know. Grain of salt. Still, anonymous sources tell Bloomberg that Trump may be considering running and choosing a woman or person of color to be his running mate and dropping Mike Pence. Again, this is just rumor. Take it as you will. This could not come to pass. It is just anonymous sources talking to Bloomberg, so it could even be misleading. However, I put a little bit of stock in it, just a little bit, because how Donald Trump did Pence dirty after January 6th. According to Bloomberg, sources said that Trump is looking for people who stood by him through the end of his presidency and the Capitol riots. Pence, for his part, did not do that. He hid in a corner. He was on a milk carton somewhere, couch surfing with mother, looking for a new home, probably trying to avoid the people that were trying to murder him. So, and look, Donald Trump's about loyalty. We know that. He's nothing but loyalty. That's what he expects. And from what I can understand, Mike Pence was not sufficiently loyal. Now, there are Trump spokesmen that are coming out there. That's fake news. Okay, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But still, it would make sense to me knowing what I know about Trump. So now, who would hypothetically be in the running? Well, there's some options, right? Two sources actually added that South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem is being considered on the list of potential running mates. Now, that is interesting. So Kristi Noem, of course, very, very pro-Trump, not in favor of mask mandates, any of that stuff. Okay, there you go. Others told Bloomberg that Trump would not announce if he's running until the summer 2023, to which, of course, afterwards would come the announcement for a possible running mate. And so, all right, there you go. Now, the former president also recently told Newsmax's Mark Halpern that he did not think that any other Republican could beat him in a primary if he decided to run again in 2024. Mike Pence was on the list. He was very, very low. I think he was somewhere pulling around 12%. It's either 4 or 12. I don't have it in front of me. So I'm not entirely sure. It's pretty low, whereas Trump has an incredibly high number. So for him, I do think that it's very possible that he would attempt to run again, to have a rematch with Biden. Okay, and so that's again, I've looked at polls where you had a solid majority of Republicans that are can't wait for a Trump-Biden rematch, and so it is possible. And if so, I mean, thinking about that possible rematch is deeply concerning. Assuming that, of course, nothing happens to Trump before then. But I see, and I know I'm gonna do the criticism of the Democrats now real quick here. Biden is not doing a great job. Now, is he doing better than Trump? Yeah, but it's super, super low bar. Understand that bar you can walk over. All right, it's in the ground essentially. But what you have here is Biden not doing good on a PR and policy front. Okay. And so I think that's going to hurt him in 2022, 2024, as long as people, of course, remember, some people do have a very, short memory span. I certainly do. But hey, that said, no unhinged tweets, right? At least. I mean, a lot of the libs are back to brunch, so they don't really care as much that Biden backed off some of his promises because, no bad tweets. So we're good. Great. But some of the promises that Trump made that Republicans are definitely going to exploit, in my opinion, is you've got the promises of the $2,000 checks, which turned into $1,400, which means that at the end of this whole thing, the Trump administration actually gave you more. And of course, the hyper targeting, the increased targeting of these checks and the cutoff. I mean, you're going to end up having more people, millions of people actually that received checks under Trump that are not going to receive anything under Joe Biden. So that's a bit of a disaster. Not only that, but of course we bombed Syria. We decided not to hold, or Biden decided not to hold the Saudis accountable for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, or Khashoggi, however you say that. The important thing is, let's let Saudi Arabia go. Now, I'm not saying that Trump would do different. I'm not saying Trump would do better, but they would definitely weaponize that. Republicans have no shame. They will use whatever they can to try to go after the Biden administration and say, look at us, we're better. Not only that, but there are other things that I'm sure Republicans won't bring up. No student loan cancellation. He backed away from that. That's other stuff. But okay, these are the things generally that people will remember in 2024 if and when Donald Trump runs, or whatever Republican. Josh Hawley running as fake populist. But notably, they're going to remember that Biden gave less in stimulus money during Trump and continued bombing the Middle East, selling weapons, and not delivering on making regular Americans' lives materially any better. And so that's going to be a thing, right? And so that's what people are going to remember. That's got me very, very concerned. And so, unless Biden corrects course and really starts pushing for progressive policy, yeah. I am worried about the optics of this entire thing. First of all, if Republicans would give a little bit and giving the higher up, maybe we'd get somewhere. Don't blame Biden. Not blaming Biden. I'm just blaming the really bad optics of Biden not living up to campaign promises. So that doesn't mean that Republicans would be any better. I just said that they wouldn't. Republicans are worse, but Republicans lie all the time. And so will they shamelessly use this against him? Of course they would, because Republicans are masters of hypocrisy. And you've got to understand that. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.